John, welcome to the show. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Michael.
The Southern Lakes, as I said, you would have heard my introduction, never seen them so low, and there's no snow in the Alps either, or very little around my region, which suggests that there's not going to be much of a snow melt in spring either. We've now got retail prices for electricity. I think they must be at their highest level ever as well. Have I got both those two things right? We're in for a sort of perfect storm, so to speak?
Yeah, your observation is broadly right when it comes to upstream. So what's going on with fuel? So the South Island and indeed the North Island actually, particularly around Lake Taupo, which is the main North Island catchment, they're very low. So we're down around 60% of average for this time of year. And as you say, the snow situation isn't great either. Snow melt is also, well, it's not melting at the moment, but the snow pack is also low. And you put those two things together, because hydro still backbones the entire electricity system.
Yeah.
Then you do get stress in the markets, because further down the system, so beyond hydro is a very, we all want hydro, it's free fuel, and we want that to go through the system first, and we want coal to go through the system last. Unfortunately, what's going on in between is quite a struggle at the moment, because gas just isn't there to the extent that we have been familiar with it, and because gas is so heavily squeezed, we are having to lean much more on coal, which is a pretty expensive fuel, and of course the complete opposite, having zero short-run marginal cost fuel, which is what you have with hydro. So you are seeing the markets react to that. We do have, in fact, we think they're the most, last week was probably the most expensive electricity and the most expensive gas in the world at the moment.
Wow.
And that's because the system is so stressed.
Wow. That's incredible. And it's not getting any better. I mean, it's going to rain. Oh, well, that's the next question I want to ask you, John. It's raining at the moment. We've got heavy rain warnings out. It's meant to rain and snow for the next 3 days. Does that obviate the problem instantly, or does that depend, I suppose, on how much rain there is?
Yeah, so it will provide relief, that's for certain. The question is always one of extent. How much in the way of inflows will we get into, in particular, Mapuri and the Tekapo and Pukaki systems further north of that, because that's where hydro sort of gets its backbone from, those southern systems. And as you say, and you rightly point out, those systems have been very low over the winter to date, and it is inevitable that it will rain hard at some stage. The question is, will that happen with this weather sequence, or will it happen with the next one or the one after that, and how much will it bring in? So the rain is an inevitability. It's a question of timing, because we're right now into the second half of winter and into our peak demand, and we don't have the supply available to us in terms of fuel to be able to hit that at the right time. So our storage is very shallow, which is why we're relying so heavily on thermal in the North Island. And we're in this unusual space for this time of year at the moment, where we're getting a very solid flow of energy from north to south. Normally it's the other way around. So whether you like it or not, the 750 megawatts of coal-fired generation at Huntly is keeping the system whole at the moment, and that includes sending electricity south into the South Island, because we are so weak on hydro in the south. So, that'll all correct itself, because that's the way of the world. We're going to get a lot of water coming into the system in the south. The question is one of extent and, how heavy this next weather system is, whether it's something we saw, in the last 2 years, not this year, but in 2022, 23, we had a lot of water in the system through winter, which is why the system was somewhat desensitised to what was happening elsewhere. So gas didn't really matter as much as it does now. Coal didn't really matter as much as it does now. We're in a completely different space in 2024, and we're now reliant on both of those again, and we're waiting for the big rain to come.
The thing that I just so that you know, I sit on a regional council. I'm on my third term for my pains, and we consistently get, or there's an imperative that comes out of Wellington to restrict anything that is fossil fuel, to disadvantage or disincentivise anybody from using such, and yet at the same time to put barriers in the way of any new, if you like, generation, including small-scale hydroelectric as well. How much, in your estimation, John, has our current? It's not quite a crisis yet because we're not having brownouts or anything like that, but our current stress, if you like, how much of it is created by policy from Wellington?
Yeah, so policy is always at the front of mind of any new project, and indeed some existing projects as well. I mean, the resource consents on the PFP system are coming to their natural end not too far away, and I know Meridian's going through a process at the moment of trying to renew those for another 35 years. So, new projects, yes, it's always a problem when you are going through the navigation of regulatory approvals and getting what you need in place to be able to build new. But, it's also a risk for existing capacity as well. It is absolutely front of mind for everybody involved in the generation sector here. And then atop that, you get, the expiration ban of 2018, for example. It's just an absolute left field that came from nowhere and really kneecapped a really important part of the sector, which I think in part we're now paying for because we don't have the gas in the system we expected that we would have. That's indigenous gas. Bear in mind, we don't trade electricity and gas with anyone else, of course. It's an obvious thing to say, but we're an island nation here. We don't tap into Australia for anything. It's quite unusual in the developed world, and in Europe, you can get away with quite a bit in Europe, frankly, because you've got pipelines and you've got pylons across all the borders up there, and you can always lean on your mate next door to be able to help out in times of need. We don't have that, so we need to be smarter about how we go about building out a supply side capacity. And come back to your original point, the central government, local government really does need to move towards becoming accommodative of the energy transition. So what can we do to bring in more supply and encourage that supply to come forward rather than spend in a 10-year window, spend 6, 7, 8 years of that consenting and a couple of years building. You really need to reverse that process.
The other thing, of course, you've just talked about the oil and gas ban that goes back to 2018. In your view, was that purely driven as an ideological imperative rather than as being practical? I mean, the aim was, at the other side of that, this country, as you know, has signed up to a number of international accords, which by 2030 are going to start to cost some real money. Billions is estimated, between $4 and $14 billion to purchase credits overseas related to our greenhouse gas emissions and our commitments to reduce them to particular levels. And did 2018, was that important? I mean, that was 12 years away from 2030, as you know. Was the thinking there, do you think, well, we'll have 12 years in which to be able to adjust, we'll create that extra capacity? Or was it just, in your view, a knee-jerk ideological decision that was made because, well, gas and oil are so evil?
Yeah, I think it's probably the latter of those two. There was, we at the time, the sector thrashed this around forever, and all the paperwork that did come forward as a result of, that decision back in April 2018, all the paperwork that did eventually come out, what was clear at the time was that there was essentially no evidence base to sit in behind it. So it was taken very quickly as a decision. It seemed to be the product of coalition negotiations at the time, and it wasn't the product of any sort of analysis that anyone could hang their hat on to say, well, if we do this, then the effect will be that. The effect, I think, is more one that you can see now after 5 or 6 years, and that we're seeing a mass exodus of investors from the upstream space. So we've only got 3 or 4 big companies that are left behind now, and they're at the front of every investment decision that is now made in the upstream gas sector. And that's not a great place to be, and that's I can directly attribute the exit of investors to that decision in 2018 and subsequent decisions as well, the likes of the Lake Onslow project and the like of 100% renewable electricity by 2030. Those very direct and hard-nosed, I suppose, policy targets that were brought into the system had a very direct and hard-nosed impact on the investment flows that followed as a result, because amped up the political risk very, very sharply for those who were, those who were then and still are in the business of investing over multi-decade horizons. When you get such short-sighted investment interventions or policy interventions that have a direct consequence of putting a hard stop to your investment decisions that you make, for example, 2030, 100% renewable. How can you invest on the basis of that towards something like a new gas-fired peaking plant, for example, which have a 30 to 40-year time frame? So, there's long way to say, look, there's the interventions that happened in 2018 and subsequent to that, they do play a direct role in where we are today, because the investment that you would have expected and bargained on back prior to those decisions just has not been made over the last 5 or 6 years. And as a result, we are where we are with regards to fuel shortage, and that extends both upstream with the gas situation we have now and also downstream with electricity capacity.